They gathered beneath the towering marble pillars of the Apostolic Palace. The chandeliers shimmered like distant stars, their light dancing across the gilded ceilings as whispers filled the air like a low and restless wind. It was a night carefully arranged, but not by heaven. Dignitaries from around the world were seated, their eyes glittering with expectation, their hearts veiled with unseen agendas. Princes of the Church, ambassadors of great nations, and hidden architects of the Vaticans, secret currents occupied their seats beneath the ancient domes. But beneath the grandeur and elegance of the evening, something darker pulsed, something not written in the official program. The invitation had been sent weeks before, under the guise of a cultural gala, a celebration of the sacred union between art and faith. But in quiet backrooms and dimly lit chambers, the true architects of the evening whispered a different purpose. For tonight, a message was to be sent, not from the throne of Peter, but from the shadows of ambition. The man chosen to deliver? It was Marco Salvetti, a world-renowned pianist, celebrated across Europe for his brilliance, yet notorious for his biting tongue and his open disdain for the Church's spiritual claims. He had been invited not by accident, but by intention. Behind closed doors, certain cardinals, aligned with the older factions resisting Pope Leo XIV's reforms, had extended the invitation personally. "Let the new order be reminded," one whispered, "that not all bow so easily to these self-proclaimed apostles of renewal." And Salvetti, sensing the subtle but clear opportunity, accepted with a slight, knowing smile. Before the concert, as guests mingled in the grand vestibule, Salvetti's words floated through the air like venom laced with charm. Even the cardinals have become musicians now," he mused with a mocking laugh. "Perhaps theology is no longer sufficient. Soon they'll be performing operas. Maybe the Holy Spirit will join as a guest conductor." Laughter erupted from a small cluster of high-ranking clergy nearby. Not all, but enough. The mockery was thinly veiled, yet its target was clear. Whispers had already been swirling throughout the Vatican for months. Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, increasingly favored by Pope Leo XIV, had not only risen to prominence, but was rumored to be central in the Pope's newly formed Spiritual Renewal Council, a secret council, born after the Third Secret Crisis, aiming to purify the Church before the coming storm. Some said this council was heaven-sent. Others feared it as a threat to the old power structures. And so tonight, in the full gaze of the global elite, a message was prepared: to humiliate, to diminish, to mock. As Salvetti sat before the polished black Steinway, his fingers hovered, like serpents above the keys. The whole grew quiet. Then, with a smirk curling at the corner of his mouth, he began. What should have been sacred hymns were twisted into playful, almost blasphemous renditions. The notes of Ave Verum Corpus were laced with satire. The solemn chords of Panis Angelicus were performed like a child's nursery rhyme. Gasps rippled quietly through portions of the audience, but others, those aligned with the scheme, smiled with satisfaction. It was not merely a concert, it was a performance of pride. But then, something unexpected happened. From his place among the seated cardinals, Luis Antonio Tagle rose slowly. His face was calm, but behind his eyes burned a quiet fire not of this world. Some say he had not intended to play that evening. Others whisper that he had received a prompting, a silent call from beyond. He approached the stage with reverence, and the room, sensing the shift, fell into a deeper silence. Salvetti stood from the bench, his eyebrows slightly raised, offering a mock bow. "Please, Your Eminence," he said with a smirk. "The stage is yours." For a moment, no one breathed. Cardinal Tagle seated himself before the piano. His hands rested lightly on the keys. The hall remained still, a fragile, electric silence filling the chamber as if heaven itself leaned in to listen. Then, he played. The first notes rang out, pure and crystalline, unlike anything heard that evening. His fingers moved not with the pride of the world, but as if guided by an unseen hand. The melody was not written in any program. It was ancient, eternal, Veni Sancte Spiritus. The very invocation of the Holy Spirit, drawn from the depths of the Church's most sacred hymns, began to flow. The room seemed to shift. The air grew warmer, softer, almost glowing. Witnesses would later claim that a strange light seemed to shimmer near him, not from the chandeliers, but from somewhere unseen. Several diplomats lowered their heads. One papal aide was seen weeping quietly. And then, the most whispered rumor of all, some claimed they saw behind Cardinal Tagle a man in radiant white standing silently, his face never fully visible. Cameras caught nothing, no recording, devices captured the figure. But those who saw it could not unsee it. As the melody continued, Salvetti, once so bold, now stood motionless near the side of the stage, his face pale, his confidence shattered. The music pierced through the divisions in the room. It was not mere sound, and it was a message, a divine proclamation. The Spirit is choosing his instruments. In the days that followed, rumors exploded across Rome. Some whispered that several opposing cardinals departed quietly in the nights that followed, returning to their home dioceses without public explanation. Others spoke of strange dreams that haunted certain clergy that night, visions of two great roads diverging before the church, one wide and glittering, ending in ruin, the other narrow, winding, and lit by a distant blinding light. One insider, speaking anonymously, revealed, "The room was filled with music, but what we heard was judgment." And so, beneath the marble and gold, the battle continued, not of flesh and blood, but of powers and principalities. For though they had mocked him, heaven had sent its reply. They whispered their schemes, they plotted their games, but heaven answered. And on that night, before cardinals, kings and rulers, the hand of God moved through his humble servant, and the mockers were silenced. The next morning, as dawn broke over the Vatican, the bells of St. Peter's tolled with a strange resonance. For many, it was simply another day. But for those who were in that hall the night before, the world had shifted, even if the world outside had not yet realized it. The city awoke to whispers, carried through cobblestone streets, from sacristy, chambers to embassies, from the Swiss Guards' inner quarters to the offices of the Secretariat of State. The name Tagle was on every tongue, but not merely as a cardinal, as something more mysterious, more dangerous, depending on who you asked. Within hours, anonymous sources began leaking details of what had transpired. The press began circling like vultures sensing a hidden drama behind the Vatican walls. But what they didn't know was far greater than what they reported. Inside the Vatican, Pope Leo XIV sat in private prayer before the image of Our Lady of Fatima, the very icon which had accompanied him since the Third Secret crisis erupted months prior. His face was solemn, yet peaceful, as if prepared for what was coming. Because the concert had not only exposed the divisions within the Church, it had triggered something far older, something written, something sealed, high above in the apostolic. Archives, where few are allowed to enter, a document long buried was quietly removed from its vault. Two men, both trusted by the Holy Father, carried it to his private chambers. This document was not the Third Secret of Fatima known to the world. It was the addendum, a highly restricted extension of the secret, never publicly disclosed, allegedly written in the final days of Sister Lucia's life, given directly to the pontiff of that time under divine instruction. Its contents described a time of great sifting within the Church, a period where two camps would emerge, one loyal to the Spirit, the other to their own ambitions. And in its cryptic language, a figure was mentioned, one described only as the musician of the Spirit, whose hands shall call down light. Many inside the Vatican had long debated whether this referred to an actual person or was merely metaphorical. But, after last night, some no longer doubted. Meanwhile, a secret meeting was convened in one of the heavily guarded rooms of the Apostolic Palace. Present were a group of senior cardinals, some allies of Leo XIV, others deeply resistant to his reforms. The tension was suffocating. One cardinal, aged and sharp-eyed, spoke first. His voice cut through the silence like a blade. This cannot be ignored. What occurred last night was no mere performance. It was a sign and a warning. Another, one who had supported Salvetti's invitation, clenched his jaw. Are we truly now to believe in visions, in apparitions behind pianos? Shall we surrender the ancient governance of the Church to mystical theatrics? A third cardinal, one closer to the Holy Father, leaned forward, his voice low but steady. You may mock, Your Eminence, but even the guards stationed at the exit saw the figure. Multiple eyewitnesses described the same presence, a man in white behind Cardinal Tagle who was never captured on camera. We have reviewed the footage. The cameras show nothing, and yet they all saw. The argument intensified, but what none of them yet knew was that across the Tiber, forces beyond the Vatican were also taking notice. Certain intelligence operatives, assigned to monitor Vatican developments for powerful nations, filed urgent reports. Their handlers in distant capitals, normally dismissive of church politics, now watched with growing unease. Why? Because where the Spirit moves, the powers of the world begin to tremble. Some whispered that a particular European power, long entangled in Vatican diplomacy, had already begun preparing a dossier titled, simply, The Tagle Phenomenon, and in secret, Masonic circles, those long invested in influencing the direction of the Church from the shadows, emergency meetings were called. One document recovered later by an insider contained a chilling line. If the musician is who we suspect, the timeline must accelerate. Delay is no longer tolerable. But who was orchestrating these moves behind the veil? And what was this timeline? They referenced, back inside the Vatican, Pope Leo XIV met with Cardinal Tagle in private. No recordings, no aids, only the two men and the cross that stood between them. Leo XIV's voice was soft. Luis, what happened last night was not for them, it was for heaven. Tagle's eyes glistened, but he remained humble. Holy Father, I only played the hymn, nothing more. Leo shook his head slowly. No, my brother, you became the vessel. The Pope then placed upon the table an ancient ring, not his own fisherman's ring, but one far older, passed down secretly through certain successors of Peter since the time of Pope Pius XIV. This, Leo whispered, belongs to the one who will lead the remnant in the storm. Tagle's hands trembled, but before he could respond, a Vatican aide burst into the room, pale, breathless, voice shaking. Holy Father, urgent news from Milan. 3 senior cardinals aligned with the resistance have been found, unconscious. Simultaneously, they speak of visions, of 2 roads, and a voice warning them. The time of dividing has come. Leo and Tagle exchanged a glance. The weight of prophecy now stood between them like a living flame. The Vatican walls were now vibrating with whispers of something far greater than political division. The war behind the war had begun. Meanwhile, across the city, Marco Salvetti remained confined within his private hotel suite. Since the concert, he had refused all interviews, declined all requests for comment. Some said he was simply embarrassed, but those closest to him knew otherwise. The once proud pianist was now a haunted man. Witnesses described his condition as deeply shaken, as if he had seen something no human eyes were prepared for. One of his assistants, breaking silence days later, reported hearing him muttering late into the night. I saw his eyes. I saw the light behind him. It wasn't Tagle. It wasn't him playing. The music, it was not of this world. Medical. Professionals sent by concerned officials could find no physical illness. But Salvetti's spirit was fractured, and then, in the darkest hours before dawn, his assistant found a note on his bedside table. It read simply, "Forgive me. I played for man, but I stood before God," and he was gone. The authorities found no trace of where Salvetti had vanished. As the days turned to weeks, the spiritual pressure inside the Vatican continued to build. Messages flowed secretly to monasteries across Europe, hidden communities of prayer warriors, some unknown even to most clergy, were activated. In one such monastery near Fatima, an aged nun rose from her decades-long silence. "The sequence has begun," she whispered. "The division will no longer be hidden. The shepherd has chosen his flute." Her words were recorded and transmitted quietly to only one destination: the private archives of Pope Leo XIV. But in the enemy's camp, panic was growing. For decades, the adversary had infiltrated councils, whispered into the ears of bishops, manipulated conferences, and sowed confusion among the faithful. But they had not prepared for this. They had not prepared for the hand of God to use something as simple as a piano, and as humble as a servant who did not seek the stage. The old prophecy was moving into motion. The Vatican's most secret document, known only to a handful, spoke of this moment. When pride performs before princes, and heaven replies with a melody, not written by man, know that the final pruning has begun. And so it had. The world outside remained mostly blind to what was stirring beneath the domes of St. Peter's. Headlines ran their usual cycles: political disputes, global conflicts, economic forecasts. But beneath the surface, an invisible war had erupted. And at the center of it stood a man who had not sought power, who had not schemed for position, but whom heaven was now lifting for purposes not even he fully grasped. Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle. Within secret Vatican corridors, a storm was intensifying. The factions that had long opposed Pope Leo XIV's spiritual renewal felt the ground shifting beneath them. For years they had grown comfortable behind layers of protocol, hidden alliances, and worldly influence. But now, something was unraveling. Their carefully woven webs were breaking strand by strand. Private meetings between certain high-ranking prelates grew more desperate. One whispered to another in a locked chamber late one night, "If we do not act now, it will be too late." The prophecy is no longer a distant threat. It's breathing down our necks. Their fears were not irrational, for in the days following the concert, unexplained occurrences multiplied inside Vatican territory. Sacred images weeping inexplicable tears. Witnesses describing faint melodic hymns echoing in empty basilicas. Even the Swiss guards reported seeing soft flickers of light moving silently along the ancient colonnades at night. Lights that vanished upon approach. And the rumors of the man in white behind Tagle that evening had now reached near mythical proportions among Vatican staff. An elderly custodian, who had worked inside the Apostolic Palace for decades, confessed to a priest one morning after Mass, "Father, I saw him, standing behind Cardinal Tagle as he played. But when I blinked, he was gone." It was as if heaven itself stood on that stage. Elsewhere, in the Vatican Observatory, a group of astronomers recorded a peculiar celestial anomaly, a sudden appearance of a brilliant star-like object directly above Rome, lasting only a few seconds before vanishing without explanation. Instruments captured its presence, but data could not identify its origin. One of the scientists, though trained in logic and reason, was heard whispering to a colleague, "I am no prophet, but something is happening, something not of this earth." But not all eyes upon Rome were earthly. Beyond the visible, unseen forces gathered. In distant places, both within earthly power centers and in realms far darker, strategies were accelerating. Those who had long worked to undermine the Church's divine mission sensed that their time was growing short. And as heaven stirred, the enemy unleashed its own counteroffensive. Certain media outlets, long infiltrated by anti-church elements, began releasing coordinated articles targeting Pope Leo XIV and Cardinal Tagle. Accusations of manipulation, secret societies, financial scandals, all designed to create confusion and sow distrust among the faithful. But behind the screens and headlines, spiritual forces of wickedness were orchestrating far more than mere journalism. In hidden occult circles throughout Europe, rituals intensified. Desperate incantations were spoken in forbidden tongues. They feared what was rising in Rome. One chilling document, later discovered by Vatican intelligence, contained these words: "The musician has touched the altar. The seals are breaking. Delay him, confuse him, divide the faithful, or the Spirit will consume all our works." Inside the Vatican, Pope Leo XIV moved with both swiftness and silence. He had seen enough. The Third Secret's final layer was now alive before him. The time of half measures was over. In the dead of night, he summoned a secret gathering of trusted cardinals and clerics inside the ancient Clementine Hall, the same chamber where many popes had breathed their last breath. The Holy Father's voice was grave. "My brothers, we are no longer in the realm of politics. We stand in the center of prophecy. The purification has begun, and you know well what follows." A moment of fearful silence filled the room. Then one elderly archbishop whispered, "The warning." Heads lowered in solemn acknowledgement, for the warning, foretold by saints, visionaries, and mystics, spoke of a coming moment when all souls on earth would simultaneously experience divine illumination. Their sins laid bare before them. No matter rank or title. A global examination of conscience. Pope Leo continued, "Before that day, there will be war within these very walls. The forces of old power will not surrender easily. They will rage against the Spirit, but we must stand firm." And Cardinal Tagle, the Holy Father turned to him, "You have been chosen for more than you know. Your music was but the first note of heaven's melody. The next movements will require greater courage." Tagle bowed. His head, his voice breaking slightly. "Holy Father, I am unworthy." Leo XIV smiled gently. "No one is worthy. That is why heaven chooses the humble." As this sacred council ended, one final order was issued. Activate Project Sancta Lux, an ancient protocol kept secret for generations, meant only to be initiated in times when the Church faced existential spiritual war. Its details remain veiled, even to this day. But insiders knew. Once Sancta Lux was activated, every hidden remnant loyal to heaven would rise to their positions. Monks, nuns, priests, bishops, those who had remained in prayerful secrecy, awaiting their moment of divine commission. And across the world, signals went out. In remote monasteries, bells rang at midnight. In catacombs beneath certain cathedrals, aged scrolls were opened. In small chapels long forgotten by Rome, flames were lit on ancient altars. The bride of Christ was awakening. But as the forces of light moved, so too did the enemy. Inside secretive chambers near Castel Gandolfo, a forbidden council gathered. Not cardinals, not clergy, but powerful men in shadows who had long sought dominion over the Church's earthly throne. They called themselves the Architects. One of them, an elder statesman with connections reaching into multiple governments, declared, "The Holy Spirit may move, but men rule this earth. If this Cardinal Tagle rises any further, the balance we've preserved for decades will shatter. He is not merely a bishop, he is a symbol, and symbols ignite revolutions." Another, more sinister, added, "Then we must sever the root before it bears irreversible fruit." A plot was born, a plan to discredit, isolate, and, if necessary, eliminate those standing in the path of their long-planned dominion over the Holy See. But what none of them fully grasped was this: they were not fighting men. They were fighting the hand of the living God, and heaven was not finished.